Wait a little bit longer. No, let's get started then. Great. Well, thank you for joining us today. This is our Residential Resilience Action Team meeting, our May meeting, and we have an agenda that's really heavy on one of our items. So we'll get into this. Today, we're going to have a brief introduction, as we always do. The introduction will give you background on where we are, how we got established, and where we're going with this particular task force. We do want to talk about our action plan progress. The plan, as we are entering into our home stretch, we are going to start to show you some examples as action team members, examples of how thorough this report will be, and hopefully you will see the example and then start to work on your own plan, so that we can start to finish this out and have a final report. The flood insurance survey and discussion will be about 70 minutes. That will be a live a survey that we will go through. Hopefully, folks will chime in with a lot of discussion, to really get into the detail of what it's like living in DC when you have a rain event, and after the rain event, and the types of damage and effects that causes on residents, and businesses. So that's the point of that particular conversation, and how we develop an insurance tool to accommodate for all of those varying types of effects and impacts. And then, as usual, we'll have a closeout with next steps, where we'll give a little bit of a homework assignment for our next meeting. Next slide, please. So this task force was established in 2021, and it was created by the city administrator in response to the September 2021 flood. This task force reports directly to the Deputy Mayor of Operations and Infrastructure, Dean Wah. And we have two co-chairs from DC Water, is Mr. Gaddis, who's the CEO of DC Water, and Mr. Tommy Wells, who is the director from DOEE. We kicked off our first meeting as a full task force in November of 2021. And it's important that everyone know that all of the proceedings are open to the public. The task force and the action team meetings are open. We've posted everything in terms of the archives of the minutes, any resource materials, and upcoming dates on the dcfloodtaskforce.org website. Again, that's dcfloodtaskforce, all one word, .org website. Next slide, please. So we do have a schedule that's regular. The full flood task force meets every other month on the third Wednesday. The next meeting is on May 18th. And we have action team meetings. We have two. They meet every month. Residential Resilience is the committee that we're talking about today. That meets on the second Tuesday of every month. And the Governance and Coordination action team meetings meet on the second Friday of every month. We will have, as I mentioned before, we will have a final report of all of the categories that we're discussing, and that is due on November 2022. After the final report is submitted, we will have some kind of tracking and progress on all the action plan items, and we will continue that discussion based on from a budgeting perspective, and have action plan priorities. And we will meet annually to do that. So we do have two action teams, as I mentioned. Residential Resilience covers covers 4 of the 9 categories, and the Governance and Coordination action team covers categories 5 through 9. Our next Governance and Coordination meeting will be on Friday, May 13th, this week. Yes, this week. So our action plan progress, we will discuss again that example of the thorough detail that we are putting together based on the meetings that we've had to date. And we will get into that conversation, and we will have Nick, I think that's you, right? Nick from DOEE. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Mati. And Adria, or actually, Stephanie, can you give me screen share privileges, please?
Can you make that any larger?
Yes, I will in a second. Here we go. Okay, can you guys see what looks like an action plan? I can zoom in a second, but I just want to give just the picture real quick. Sorry, Meredith, can you see the screen?
Yes, I can see.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to do in the next 5 minutes, we're going to keep it short, is I'm going to give an overview of one action plan, one draft action plan that we've created at DOE. And the goal of what I'm trying to do is show everybody what one of these looks like. And then after I talk about this, Meredith is going to talk about what the process will be for getting these action plans approved through the action teams and also the flood task force, because ultimately that is the primary function of this task force, is to produce these action plans and have them all approved, and then we can start kind of working on them. So this is, we've sent out a template at least a month ago, I think, and so everyone's got a standard template to work with, and I'll just kind of walk through what's in here. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So it starts off with an overview and the implementation strategy. And basically we just want to keep something pretty simple. And I think this first sentence gets kind of at it, which is the goal of this action is to make the approximately 1,000 residential structures in the 100-year and 500-year floodplain, to make them flood protected. So that's kind of like the goal, and there's a little bit more detail in this, but that's kind of the key takeaway. And then in this section, you also are supposed to list, what wards or ANCs are, primarily affected by this action. What's the lead agency? In this case, it's DOE, and then what other supporting agencies need to be involved. So that's the quick overview. And then there's a background section. So, what specific goal is this supporting? And it just goes to the top of every page, it's showing you what category this is in. So floodproofing individual homes, and then the name of this particular action plan is Action 3.1, develop a program to floodproof homes. Okay, so going back to the background. So this is also where you put any historical context. So we've put some notes in here that we've heard residents talk about the cost of protecting their homes before. We've commissioned 3 separate research reports, and we also have done a lot of research on similar programs throughout the United States that this program can be based on. So obviously, like we're saying here, we've actually commissioned 3 research reports that kind of form the foundation to this proposal, but we're not, we can include that as kind of addenda, but we're not trying to explain everything that we did in those research reports, because we're trying to keep these action plans short. So just bullet points for the historical context, and then every action plan has a section on equity. Basically, how are you designing this action to focus on equity outcomes, and or how are you thinking about the population that's going to be impacted by this? And so for us, we've done a lot of research thinking about the populations that are in the floodplains, and just to highlight this top bullet point here, Ward 7 and 8, which are some of our more vulnerable wards in the city, they contain almost all of the single-family homes that are in the floodplain in the district. So there's a couple of different statistics here, including the last one, which shows that these areas have a high social vulnerability index score, meaning more vulnerable than kind of like the average DC resident. So this is both giving us reasons why we're focusing on Ward 7 and 8, but also helping us to understand a little bit about the community that lives there.
Yeah. Now, I've mentioned this before. I see wards 1 and 5 are not on the list. Again, the genesis of this task force was flooding in Northeast DC. Wasn't the primary flooding in Ward 5?
Yes.
So I don't understand why we're focused on the floodplain when in fact the flood that led to this task force was not in the floodplain.
Right, that's a good point. And I think the main thing here is this is just one action plan. And this action plan is focused on homes that are in the FEMA floodplain, in part because we are trying to use FEMA grant money in order to pay for some of this. And FEMA only likes to spend their grant money in designated floodplain areas. So if you just think about this as one action of probably 20 plus actions that the flood task force is going to do, there will be many other actions that will be specifically focused on the interior flooding concerns that happened in September.
Yeah,
September
but that
17th.
means effectively that you're backing into priorities with a list of projects instead of starting with what is the highest vulnerability area in the district to flooding. Understand what I'm saying?
I not quite. I do
Well,
hear what you're
easy.
saying, which is
Quick question. What is the highest vulnerability area to flooding in the district? Is that in the floodplain or outside the floodplain?
well, I think so. By definition, it is in the floodplain because we know if you're in the floodplain, we can like pretty specifically calculate the risk. There's a 1% chance every year that if you're in the 100-year floodplain that you will be flooded.
Yeah, but when you look at what has actually happened, the worst flooding we had was not in the floodplain. Again, the
In
genesis of
recent
the
in
task
recent
force was
so
flooding outside of the floodplain.
and I don't disagree with you. Like I'm not.
But
The problem
I just
is
want to understand how that gets factored in.
Yeah, let's acknowledge that there are many places in the city where it does flood. There are a lot of residents that need to be helped and protected. There is a prioritization that
Yeah.
has to take place. We have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
We think what we know that residents in the 100-year floodplain are at a very high risk. And so we are starting this project addressing that high risk.
I think it also might be helpful. So, what we're going to be talking after we get through this action plan, we're going to spend most of the time talking about flood insurance. And I think one of the primary drivers of that conversation is how are we helping the people who are not in the floodplain who were flooded in September 10th and elsewhere in Ward 5. And so what I'm trying to say there is going to be a specific action focused on flood insurance, focused on how do we help people that suffer from interior flooding that aren't mapped. But so the task force is going to be acting on multiple goals. They're going to be tackling different problems. Certainly we're not trying to minimize the Ward 5 interior flooding that's happening.
This is Amber Hewitt. I just want to add one thing. I'm not a floodplain expert, and I don't have a stance on anything specific that's been said. I just always flag Ward 7 and 8 equaling equity, and I know that's not. I'm assuming that's not the assumption here, but I just wanted to make that point.
I understand. I think if the issue is flooding, you start with the area most vulnerable to flooding. And the New York City example that was presented at our last meeting, they decided that of the three types of flooding, rainfall induced flooding was the most significant to focus on. And then they overlaid that on the poorest areas of the city. And so let me back up. Of the three types of flooding, which is the biggest risk for the district? Which is the district most vulnerable to?
So the one answer to that question, so is that we don't have enough information about the interior flooding to tell you that. we know historically where it has flooded, right? We can circle areas on a map that say this neighborhood was flooded on September 10th. But what we don't have is what is the probability every year that will be flooded? What is the depth of the flood that would happen at that probability? But we do have that for the FEMA floodplain maps, and that's typically how you would define. So if you wanted a scientific answer of what has the highest probability of being flooded and what would have the most damage if it was flooded, you would need more information. And the good news is DOE is starting the integrated flood model, which is going to give us the answer to that question, but it won't be for another couple of years.
Nick, if I could add my 2 cents, or maybe it's just 1 penny, 1.5 cents by the time I finish. So I think the point is valid, to to wonder or consider why the district is not focusing on some of the floods that we've seen more recently, because we're seeing them and they're happening. I think that understanding, um, can be gained from a conversation about how FEMA looks at flooding in terms of risk. As you pointed out, Nick, in some of these smaller events, interior flooding, even the September 10th, 2020 event, in terms of their risk, they're modeled to occur more often. And the amount of water that we see is significant. However, when you pair them or compare them to the 100-year flooding, 500-year flooding, the 100-year being defined as a high risk event, and 500 being defined as a moderate level event, the area covered is much broader, and the height of the flooding is greater. And so, uh, you know, I think that we probably have to have a conversation about, the types of flooding that the district is, and maybe I think we may have had this, but we might need to revisit it. The types of flooding the district is um, at risk for experiencing, and how FEMA categorizes that, how we want to categorize it, and then look at what our actions for addressing each one is. Because I've heard this particular piece come up again and again, and so that might be helpful to get us on the same page.
Yeah, thanks, Victor. So the note that
Let me just add, Nick, the point here is very valid. And one way we could modify this action plan is to identify that there are additional residential areas that will need this program. And basically that's going to just up the numbers. So right now we have 1,000 homes identified. If we add in these other areas, it's going to get up to 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 or more. And so that just means more money, potentially more time, that will be needed to complete this. But I think we can address it in here as a greater need. And then it just has to be prioritized and resources applied.
And then also, just looking at how we prioritize, maybe as a district, we decide that we want to prioritize flooding that might have a lower magnitude, but happens more often.
right.
So Victor, you mean a lower magnitude as well as in
It's a smaller event, not to minimize the actual real life impact. So, pardon my description, but compared to a 100-year flood, which the district hasn't seen in a very long time, it is a smaller event, but we're seeing them more often. And so maybe because of that fact, it's something that we want to prioritize because we're dealing with it more often.
So I'm taking a mental note here about the strong feelings that we need to be making sure we're doing more for not just the FEMA mapped floodplains in Ward 7 and 8, but areas that we know are flooded, from interior rain in Ward 5, Northeast, and elsewhere. And I think Meredith's right. I think we can revise this particular action plan. And I'll point out some ways where I think we can do it. So in this action plan, like all the other action plans, I think the meat and potatoes of it is this page, the timeline and budget. And so this, if you strip away all the other background text and everything else, what you have is the year, what agency is going to do something, and then what we're going to do. I think specifically in this timeline, we could revise it by saying in 2022 and 2023 and 2024, we're focusing on wards 7 and 8 that are in the FEMA map floodplain. And then in 2025, as we get maps produced from the integrated flood model, where we can scientifically say these are areas of flood risk from interior flooding, then we can start to add any homes that are mapped in those zones and add them to this program as well. So I think we can.
Sorry, Nick. We had a question come through the chat, and since you just started bringing up the FEMA funding again, I thought this might be a good question time to ask the question. From Jane Waters, the question was, are we saying that if we made this available to all of DC, FEMA would not support it?
Well, okay, so that's a good question. Let me respond to that when we get to the budget part here. So we've put in just a high level estimate. This is saying 34 million over 10 years, which we think is more than enough to take care of the 1,000 homes that are in the FEMA mapped floodplain. Now, if you scroll down, we have a similar timeline, which is where is this money coming from, in what year, and from what source? So you notice here in 2022, so we already have this money from FEMA. This is just 63,000 from one of our FEMA grants, and they are kind of like giving us seed money to do some of the beginnings of this Flood Smarts homes resilience assessment. As a condition of using this money, it needs to be in the FEMA 100-year and 500-year floodplains. So FEMA, like if we tried to spend this money on a home that was not in the floodplain and we sent the invoice to FEMA, like they wouldn't pay it. However, if you notice in this next line item here, 2023 through 2027, local funding source, 2.6 million. So in the FY23 budget that the mayor sent to the city council, it actually might be 2.3 million, but 2.3 million set aside for Flood Smart homes in 2023. This is local money, so we can do, we don't have to tie it to the 100-year or 500-year floodplain. We do in our initial proposal, in the mayor's budget proposal, but it's not to say in future years we can't adjust that. I guess the other thing I want to point out here is, notice in this budget timeline, we're putting 2.6 million as this is the need, but I can't tell you, and no one on this call can tell you, if we will actually get it in the local budget every year from 2023 to 2027. And that's okay. That's kind of the point, is we need to be identifying the funding needs so that when the budget conversations come around in the fall, that we can be presenting, this is what it's going to take in order to make the city more resilient. This is what we think we need to do, and then make the case that way. And then it's up to residents, stakeholders, agencies to make their case. So hopefully that answers the question about the FEMA funding, but also shows here that I think there is a little bit of flexibility depending on where you get the funding, where we could expand who is eligible.
Thank you.
Just wanted to give you an opportunity to give kind of an introduction to what we're doing right now. We had significant number of folks join us while you were having a conversation on this
Sure.
actual document for the draft plan. So just kind of catch people up.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Monty. So right now what we're looking at is one action plan out of probably more than 20, just to give everybody a sense of what they might ultimately look like. Because at the end of this flood task force, what is going to be left is all of these action plans, and these action plans are the roadmaps for agencies to then go on and implement and help make the city more flood resilient. And so our goal here is to just give you a flavor of just this one, to see how it's structured, see what kind of information we're putting in it, see the kind of level of detail. So as you're looking on here, I'm not giving you the full, like, how did we come up with 2.6 million? We can certainly attach this as an appendix. But in this task force action plan, it's really just more high level. So that's kind of what we're going for. And I've gone through, for folks who are just joining, I've gone through, this is only a 5-page action plan, but essentially it starts with the overview, background, historical context, why we're doing this, a section on equity, kind of explaining why, how this action is being informed by equity concerns. And then you might have just joined us for this, but a timeline. So who's doing what agency is doing it, and what exactly are they doing? And then how are we paying for this? This is the budget section. And then the last section here is public outreach and input. So what outreach have we done so far that is informing this action? And so you can see here, we've done a number of events where we've kind of heard and learned from the public about how to shape this proposal. And then, were there any public comments of relevance? And then we have both comments that we've heard in separate kind of unrelated workshops, but also we've listed some comments here specifically that we heard at task force listening sessions that I think are helping us direct how we do this program. So that's the that's what one action plan looks like.
Yeah,
And
I just
we
want
did.
to add in, this is probably one of the more complicated action plans. There's quite a bit of substance here. Many of the others are more, let's just say simpler, a little more straightforward in their timeline and things. So for agencies who are preparing action plans, we are trying to make this high level and simple.
Yes, thanks, Meredith. And like I mentioned, I think, so I heard you very strongly, and I think we can edit this to include a proposal for including non-floodplain areas, interior flooding areas into this as well. So I think we should switch back to the slides, and I'll hand it over to Meredith. So what you saw is just one. And so we have, I'm guessing, probably more than 20 that the flood task force needs to do. And so Meredith is going to talk a little bit about our proposal for that.
So I'm not going to be the presenter. Let's switch back to Adria.
We are working on that now. Thanks for your patience.
Yeah, so as the slides are coming up, yeah, so what our plan is, you can see that these action plans do have a bit of information in them. We want to use the action team meetings to talk about the plans as they're being developed. We're going to provide copies of the plans over email so that everyone can take their own time to look through them and present them at the task force meeting. So we have a task force meeting coming up next Wednesday. DOEE has 8 plans that are ready to share. to be reviewed by the task force. So I think, Nick, are we going to try to share these before the task force meeting?
I think try being the key.
Try. Okay, we're going to try. So only one of this list is actually from the residential resilience, the one Nick just showed you on Flood Smart Homes. The others are out of our infrastructure and governance action team, but deal with regulations, legislation, flood map updates, and outreach and documentation procedures after a flood. So this is our list that we intend to share, present next week at the task force meeting. Let's go to the next slide. So we've been trying to figure out how do we go through a process to approve all of these action plans we're developing. Our current count is we have about 17 actions that have been greenlit, meaning, you know, we've got an agency who started working on or who has been given the go to work on an action plan. And that's not including any of the insurance. Well, it's only got one part of the insurance programs right now, so we know there will be many more action plans coming. So we've set up a schedule. If you go to the next slide. So this is our draft process here, and we are open for comments. Is we present, give a brief presentation on each of the action plans at the full task force meetings. And we have those every 2 months. We'll send out the action plans for task force review and probably post them on the website, the public website as well for comment. Giving 4 weeks for review, 2 weeks to incorporate the comments. We'll send the revised action plans before the next task force meeting. So we have 2 months between task force meetings. And then when we get to the task force meeting, if there are any action plans that have significant comments or that people are not confident they want to vote for, we'll set those aside for a separate discussion. But if there are ones where all the comments are good and it looks like we're ready to approve, we'll do one vote to approve those action plans, and then we'll discuss the others that may not be ready for approval as needed. Going to the next slide. So we have 4 remaining task force meetings before we're set to finish in November. So our plans are to present about 7, maybe 8 more. We'll see how the schedule goes and what's ready at each task force meeting. So next week we'll present these first set of action plans to the task force. Then we'll send them out for review before the July meeting. We'll send the finals right before the July meeting, and then we'll vote on those action plans in the July meeting. And we'll present the next set of action plans for review. So what this means is we need to keep moving, keep writing these action plans, keep moving. There have been lots of great discussions, so we just gotta keep things, keep these planned going.
Meredith,
Any questions on this?
I was just going to share, Meredith, we had a question come in the chat while you were speaking. This is from Thomas Glaskick. It says, I know flood insurance is included later in today's agenda. Just curious whether envision the home assessment and flood proofing are designed to help reduce national flood insurance program rates for impacted policyholders.
Yeah, I think Nick would be best to address that, but generally, the answer is yes. It depends on what's done. Nick.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The intent of the program is first and foremost to like make your home more flood proof. But if there are certain activities like elevating utilities or other things, you can actually reduce your premium too. So it's like a double benefit.
So any other questions on this process we've laid out on sharing the action plans, having them reviewed, voting on them at the task force? You're always welcome to send us comments after the meeting if you have suggestions. That's it on this section.
So next up, we have our flood insurance survey and discussion. Again, this is a place in the agenda where we really want to participate as we go question by question to think about the range of flood activities overlaid with the conversation of equity and any other factor that we're going to be talking about and discussing in our flood plan period. So we just want to take all of those thoughts into making sure that this survey is getting us to a point where we are covering the bases to best serve as an insurance instrument or tool, best serve the residents of the District of Columbia. So with that, I think, Nick, you are up again and you're going to guide us through this conversation as well. Everyone's welcome to pitch in with each of the survey questions.
Yeah. Great. And so, yeah, just so everyone knows, I mean, our plan is we don't have anything else planned for the rest of this meeting. We want to spend time looking at the results, thinking about the results, and what they mean for how we would design a flood insurance program. So basically, my plan is I'm going to, we'll put on the screen what these results were, and then kind of just open it up for questions, comments, and discussion that way. So I see in the chat real quickly,
Yeah. If you
how
could
many
tell us
survey
how
response?
the survey came about and who it was sent to address Jane's question.
Sure. Yes. So we, yeah, I guess if you missed the last meeting, we had a really good discussion. We had some experts from the Wharton School over at UPenn talk to us about a couple of different flood insurance strategies, and really, I think they kind of pushed us to answer the question: what exactly are we trying to get? What exactly are we trying to achieve by a new flood insurance program here? And it left us with a lot of questions. Do we want to? And you can see like one of them here. Like, is it more important that we cover more people, or are we looking for a certain dollar coverage or certain types of coverage? So we needed to answer those questions in order to know how we're going to design any kind of flood insurance program. So we created this survey and we sent it to everyone who is on the residential resilience action team. And if folks who got the email wanted to send it on to some of their colleagues, we encourage that too. So to date, the responses that you're looking at it's 16. We have 16 responses. So that's kind of like that's the data that we have for right now for discussion. So this first question, the first three questions are kind of like you have to choose one, knowing that at some point the district is going to have to make some tough calls. Basically have to make some tough calls about spending district money versus benefits to residents and trying to narrow down, what's going to be more important. So this first question is it more important to cover more people but offer less coverage, or is it more important to have a bigger amount of coverage but offer it to less people? And you can see here about 70% thought more people being covered, even if it meant less amount, was better. So I'll just pause here. Any thoughts, questions on this one?
Hey, Nick, this is Philip. Can I make a general comment
Sure.
about the survey? Not necessarily the specific question yet.
Go for it.
Okay, so I think as we go through the survey, I think that the discussion that was had earlier was very useful to inform this discussion. Because I think we lose sight of the fact that I think we really need potentially multiple insurance solutions to address different aspects of flooding issues. And I don't know enough to know how to prioritize one over the other, but at this point I don't know that we need to prioritize one over the other. I think we need to identify the various issues that need to be addressed. You know, one could be relevant to homes in the 100 and 500 year floodplain. Another one could be relevant to homes in areas that like those that were impacted by the flooding in the past few years. You know, some could be relevant to every resident in the District of Columbia. But I think that's what you'll see when you go through this survey, is that that there is not going to be one solution that addresses flood problems in the district, and we're going to have to identify the particular types of problems and then develop solutions which, you know, may involve insurance, they may involve something else. But
May I jump in here, Nick?
Sure.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Barbara Mitchell. I am Assistant General Counsel here at DC Water. And I think this one hits particularly close to home for us because, as you probably are aware, during the September 10th event, you know, we were really excited that our board was able to stand up a $1.5 million pot of money to help residents deal with remediation and, you know, the effects of mold due to the flooding event. And so I think I was nodding emphatically as Philip was talking because I think from our perspective, you know, when we started the program, we were thinking $5,000 to help folks to clean their homes and to remediate has to be, you know, exactly what folks are looking for. And honestly, there was a little bit of a gap between the claim and the social service space. And what I mean by that is, the mayor was emphatic that DC Water should have someone to discuss what specifically our program was built for and how it could be helpful to the customers by providing a cell phone number. And that number was mine. And so I spoke to several residents, as did my colleague Tanya, who's also on the line. And, you know, we really saw a gap there. You know, I can just give one quick example without giving too much away. One resident called me and really divulged that she was in a domestic violence situation. She was courageous enough to find a basement apartment for her kids. Safety was obviously paramount. And then the flooding event happened. And you know, our money was only for remediation and mold, but there was a clear social service issue that we couldn't meet. We didn't have money to provide her to help her with the clothes and the winter jackets that she had gotten for her children. And so that was obviously devastating for her. And I'm wondering, you know, kicking it back to the group, if that's something that we're seeing or thinking we should take on as a task force. Is that kind of outside of the scope of what we're looking to do? One other example very quickly is that some folks had flooding insurance, but their flooding insurance didn't cover things like their water heaters. They, you know, the insurance providers expected that they would have service contracts and not use their flooding insurance. I don't know if that's particular to this industry or that specific provider, but we did have those situations. And I'm just wondering, kind of piggybacking off of what Philip said, are we thinking as a group that we're going to be able to fill that gap with different, you know, I guess, efforts from different agencies to not only meet the claim that we are discussing today, but also the social service issue? And I don't know if OPC is on the line, ORM, or DISB wants to kind of respond to that. But I certainly agree with you, Philip. There's got to be more than just, you know, straight claims and that's it.
So maybe one thing I'm hearing is that some of these either or questions, maybe they should just be, let's do both and separate in different programs. Is that one way to describe it?
Yes, there are several needs, and I think that we should talk as a task force on the needs we believe we will be able to meet with these efforts. And I think we do have to name that so that we can be clear on what we're trying to do. Because as I said, and Tanya's on the line, I don't know if she wants to speak to this, but we certainly thought $5,000 to remediate and to remove mold was going to really take residents, meet their
Yeah.
needs, and it just wasn't enough.
Well, let's I think there's some questions like more specifically on like the amount and also, you know, what should be covered. So let's try and get to those. Let me see the question 2 real quickly.
It's a little dated, but the average flood claim in the United States is around $30,000. So if that it helps inform this, that doesn't mean that there aren't Katrinas that where the claims are much higher, but more often than not, what we see is people who have got, you know, $20,000-$30,000 damage at most. So I think that would weigh in favor of getting more people with less coverage, but that's just one data point. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's average, not like median.
Oh, that's no fair. You're a statistician, aren't you?
Well, I'm just thinking the high value claims from like Katrina and Sandy could skew. Anyways, it's an interesting stat. So.
And I believe that FEMA can provide us that, you know, broken down by jurisdiction, just because of housing prices, different places.
Right. Yeah. Thanks. Adria, can you go to slide 2 or the next one? So this one, we might, okay, so the question here is it more important to only cover low-income residents if we can give them more, if there's a higher subsidy for them, or is it more important to cover all residents but have a lesser subsidy? This is kind of more split, but I think I'll pause here just for a minute, but I think I want to get to some of the other questions too.
I have a quick question, Nick, as I can't remember. Did we define what low income qualified for?
No, we didn't. And that came up, someone else asked that question too. This might be a follow-up that we need to ask of the group, which is, you know, if we're going to make a distinction between low income, what should that distinction be? Because it's right now we just left it kind of open-ended. That's a good question. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this one, you know, what's more important? Being able to get a quick payout, but a small dollar amount, or take a little bit longer to pay out, but have the ability to pay out a larger amount of coverage. And the folks that responded to this one, 75% said a quick payout was more important. But I'll still caveat by saying, you know, this is maybe where Philip and Barbara, what you're saying is maybe there's 2 different needs here, right? Maybe there's the quick payout needs, and that's one program, and then there's something else. I was just gonna say, any other thoughts or questions?
Well, is it the timing of which the payout occurs quantified by the amount? Like, does one correlate to the other?
This is meant to get the respondent to try and answer a hard question, which is if you had to choose. So in theory, it's possible that you could set up a program where you'd still be able to pay out a large amount and do it quickly, but that's going to cost a lot of money up front to manage that big program. Whereas I think some of the other things that we've been talking about, like parametric insurance, where you're not even sending anybody out to see like if the damage actually occurred. You're just saying the water level reached this threshold as confirmed by a weather service gauge. We're sending out checks. And you know that can obviously happen much quicker, but you don't want to send out $50,000 checks without. You don't want to send out $50,000 checks in those cases. It's going to probably be a smaller amount.
Yeah. I mean, if it's helpful at all, and I promise I'm not going to be flood insurance nerd the whole time. Phil has asked me once or twice to join, and I didn't join sooner, and I apologize. But right now, if someone has the standard flood insurance policy from FEMA, it does both. You can get $5,000 just by having a claim. So this was instituted after Harvey or during Harvey, getting money in people's hands right away, and then the formal claim adjustment. There's still a 30-day deadline for that. So that's, I mean, again, I'm talking about an insurance product. So I was wondering if you were talking about subsidizing people buying insurance, and then letting the insurance do this for us, or are we talking about subsidizing, actually creating a program where the district government's going out and adjusting claims and paying? I don't know exactly what the thought process is there.
No, it's all on the table, and I think this survey is meant to help us narrow, what the scope is of whatever we're trying to do. So.
And to be clear, Tom Glassick is a flood insurance nerd.
Well, this is the perfect place to be then. Glad to have you. Okay, let's go to a question.
Sorry, Jane Waters had a comment that just said people will always need money immediately, if only to protect their property.
Yeah, I think one conclusion I'm pretty comfortable drawing is that this quick payout, immediate money is something that the task force should focus on. Now, whether that's the only flood insurance thing that we focus on, that's up for discussion, but it seems, I don't know, does anyone disagree with that?
I think if it comes at the expense of having a significant impact, then I do find that there are drawbacks there. So if we believe that a one and done approach is best, I do think you may run into what DC Water, ran into, where some customers were just dissatisfied because they had different needs.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And I think I see Jane say, what I see Jane saying is that agree that the quick payout, immediate payout should be a focus, but not the only option that the flood task force is considering. Okay, let's go to question 4. Okay, so this is about if we're going to do subsidies. So if the government is going to subsidize the cost of whatever insurance program we do, what is kind of the what's kind of the best way to do it? So it looks like the first two, that there's general agreement that some version of either being free or greatly reduced to low incomes, and then a sliding scale is kind of the preference. And a pretty clear distinction, I would say, between 1 and 2, and then everything else.
I think that aligns with some of the thinking that we heard from folks who were expecting to be covered. I don't know if Tanya wants to, because she took a lot of data from our experience there. And I do think that one appreciation that came out of that was that we did have money for anyone who was impacted, within the parameters we set, but it was not based on income.
Exactly. We did not pay based on income. We paid based on the average cost for mitigation and dewatering. I think that would have made things a little more complicated because we were in the emergency. So we had to make some pretty fast decisions.
Yeah.
Right. So then we need to, when we say that, then we need to verify, and who's going to verify? Are we working with our DOEE partners to do that? Is that something we feel is a good idea, or in practicality just doesn't make sense? I do think we need to consider that.
And
Yeah.
I did have a question as to whether or not there is a FEMA product that could be made available to all residents in the city, um, so that it can be managed in one place versus, so like if the income could be considered in one respect, but there is an insurance product that the city can pay for on behalf of the low income residents. I'm wondering if there is something like that available.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. So any resident, you don't have to be in a floodplain, is eligible for an FIP policy. The trick is they don't cover, like the NFIP policies didn't cover all of the situations we saw in September 10th.
Yeah, there's no coverage for a basement under the SFIP. There are private flood insurers now in the market that will move in that space. But FEMA has proposed, and actually the Biden administration tried to create an affordability program on the national level over a 5-year plan. But they have a very detailed X% of the median income per zip code, this many people, and this is how the subsidies would apply. I mean, I'm not saying it's the answer. They actually spent a lot of time with Carolyn Kuski and the rest of the people at Wharton developing this, so it's out there. I don't know if any other jurisdiction has ever looked to go implement it just for their jurisdiction, but there is a structure, that FEMA is supportive of if they could just get a couple more $1 billion out of the federal government.
Yeah, no small task. No, it's an interesting way to look at it, Tanya. Let's go to the next slide, and I think these next two slides, we can have some conversation here. So this is meant to, out of all the damages that we've seen, so DC Water has heard, during September 10th, the DOE has seen, other people have kind of heard from residents. What are the types of things that we need insurance to cover? And when we wrote this question in the survey, you could see, some of these are already covered by the NFIP, some of them are not. But it's interesting to see here the cleanup and mold remediation and drywall repair, kind of clear standouts of priorities. And then, those definitely stand out to me. And I would say, Tanya, I know you have a lot of experience, and Barbara, you too, talking with customers after September 10th. Does this track with kind of what you heard?
Yes, absolutely. Our number one goal is to help customers be safe, or um, that they are able to live in their homes, or they're able to attack the immediate problem, which is water. We want that water, we want things remediated immediately because, of course, we do have the risk of mold. So first and foremost, that was our goal. So for the September 10th event, we offered up to $5,000 for cleaning and remediation, dewatering, and things like that. And that was for every customer who experienced that flood event or were impacted by that flood event. So that was definitely number one. But when the money ran out, oftentimes that was the next question. Who's going to repair my walls? and who's going to replace my property. And we're like, we have this much money and we want to help as many people as possible. So we're going to start with the we're going to prioritize with cleaning and dewatering.
Yeah. No, that's you guys have to make some tough decisions for sure. Philip, Barlow, or Edmonds, when you guys get claims or questions, like people are making claims to NFIP and getting denied, like are there things you're seeing where people are wanting coverage for that they're not getting or they don't have coverage for?
So I'm not aware that I say the number of complaints that we've gotten on an NFIP policy, there's not much we could do about it anyway. They'd have to go complain to the federal government, not us. So what we tend to see more are complaints that your homeowner's policy doesn't cover something than the NFIP. I think the other Philip may have something more to add to that.
No, I think that's right. I mean, we don't handle those cases that go through the NFIP, but when we do see, the handful of complaints that do come our way, I think the issue is, which is consistent with DC Water, is immediate cleanup and making sure mold doesn't develop. And then also people are concerned because they didn't purchase additional coverage and they're a little surprised that that damage to their basement isn't covered in a standard home insurance policy. So those are the two things that we know from the complaints that we receive, and again, very few complaints related to flood.
Yeah. Anyone else that has kind of been in this, heard from residents?
It's Chris Bailey, DCRA. I hope the other would probably recommend be a little more specific. There are fees, even during emergencies, even during disasters. Some of the cleanup, repair takes fees for getting the permits to do them. Yes, emergency work is allowed to be performed without a permit, but you are still required, even in emergency, to file for a permit application the next business day, even in response to emergency cleanup or repair. Has there been any thought to adding in what associated fees would be? Because unfortunately, the individual may be reeling from a district-wide incident, but we don't have the authority to waive fees during those incidents. So it would be, I'd like to see maybe some additional funding or at least a line item for that specific.
No, that's a good point.
Is that you're talking about a permit by the homeowner for their property, not a permit for the person who's doing the work? Yes.
Actually, both. If it is a homeowner, the homeowner themselves can apply, or they can elect to get an agent or a design professional or a contractor to submit, as long as they provide a letter attesting that that individual is pulling that permit for the work at the owner's behest.
Okay, but it's based on the address of the owner.
That's correct.
Okay, just trying to make sure I understood.
Yeah, it's a good point, Chris. Well, I think we can make sure we write that in our notes. Yeah. But it also seems like something you would write in, like the fine print of the policy, like this will pay for cleanup, mold remediation, and any associated permits, or something like that. Right. But it makes sense. Like if you have to pay for it, like you should be able to use the money for it.
Hey, Nick. I would state that number 1 and 2, when we were doing our canvassing efforts after September 10th, cleanup, mold remediation was a priority. Most of the residents at the time when we were able to canvass, which was a couple of days after the incident, had already taken those measures into their to work on remediating their homes. As you are aware, we did do some follow-up touch points with some of the residents just to see if there was other needs, if there was a possibility of potentially leveraging FEMA funding for some of the competitive grants that they have with, I think, I don't see the actual service on this list, but with elevating homes or looking at other mitigation measures. And there was a lot of hesitancy with that. So I think that the immediate cleanup is of great need, but then there was a gap there that has been mentioned earlier in calls. But then to take it to that next step, as far as looking at mitigation actions, I think there's still some hesitancy from residents if they are a repetitive, their home is repetitively getting flooded, looking at other options outside of cleanup work. Because it appears that it happens reoccurringly, and so that's something that they should, want to consider other options. So we're continually to stay in touch with those residents, but it's just something I wanted to share with the group that we observed.
What would other options be in that instance besides moving? And maybe I'm thinking too simplistically.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I don't think you are thinking so. I don't think you're, as far as what you were referring to, the residents, we talked with a couple of different areas, more in Ward 7 near Watts Branch, just looking at the option because they are in the floodplain and there were individuals with flood insurance. And so with flood insurance, it's not as publicly known as we would like. FEMA has a program in which you can work with them to do home elevations as well as acquisitions, which is what you were referring to. And relocating your home is an option as well, but that doesn't fit our our area's demographics. So we have been sharing with homeowners about home elevations, and from those members, we did get some interest, and so we're working through that process with a less than a handful of individuals. But it takes time because we're having to educate them on that and figure out the next steps for their particular home and their needs. But residents have expressed that they're at their wits' end, just with the level of damage that they're experiencing, and in some respects, not even knowing that they were in the floodplain, which is something that is kind of disheartening to understand that they went and this situation has come to them. So we're just working through that process. But that is a program that's available to residents that we're trying to leverage since September 10th.
Yeah, you're completely right. The mitigation grant program is there, but it is painful and tedious to go through. The one thing I don't know if this would be germane to the insurance side, but there's a community rating system, so CRS, things that a jurisdiction can do to enhance the jurisdiction's flood preparedness, and then that CRS rating reduces people's flood insurance premium through the NFIP. I know that the DC floodplain manager in the past was working in this space, but since Fatmano left the department, I'm not in touch with the floodplain manager, and I probably should, but that's something that we should definitely, it's a lot of administrative time, but it's something that makes flood insurance cheaper for everyone within the jurisdiction.
So Thomas, I'm the floodplain manager, so we can definitely talk more. But we do have the CRS program as something to explore for the task force.
It's a lot of work. Good luck.
Yeah, I know. It's the trade-off. All right, let's go to the next question, question 6. Okay, so this is about the like what kind of dollar amount seems to be the most important to focus on for the flood insurance program. And yeah, I think you guys can all see what I'm seeing here, like 1 and 2. So the 1K to 10K, then 10K to 50K seem to be where people are seeing the most need, which I guess is not surprising given, what I'm hearing about the 5,000 like being good, but almost not enough from DC Water's case. And I think we've heard, we heard plenty of residents in the public listening sessions who are, out $20,000, $30,000. So I guess it's not surprising to see those on there. I'm seeing 250,000 and up at the bottom. I think that makes sense. I'm a little surprised to see the 1,000 and under at number 4, but does anyone have thoughts or want to plug a certain range?
If I could just indicate that we chose 5,000 as the payment, the maximum payment for the flood claims because the average payout for just remediation was $3,000 to $5,000. And I was thinking more like in $5,000 increments. Maybe it's just that I have 5,000 stuck in my head, but I was thinking more of $5,000 increments.
Yeah, that's a good. So when you're saying the 5,000 it was for like the mold remediation and drywall repair, or just the cleanup and remediate the mold?
So it was not mold remediation. I guess it's more like water remediation to prevent mold. um, and yes, the $5,000 figure was based on an average that we paid out in prior sewer backup claims where we caused the issue.
Yeah. And then I saw Sharon right here. Average claims payout for NFIP was 11,000. Okay. I'm trying to think. We've got 12 questions here. I'm trying to pick a few to focus on. I'm thinking maybe can we go to question 9, because it's related to this one that we're just talking about. So, if this program were to if we were to focus on mid-range insurance payouts, so like if you sent an actual adjuster to say like here's what the damage was, and we'll pay you exactly the amount of your damage. What seems to be the right range for this? And basically between 3 and 12,000 seems to be what a lot of people were thinking. Any thoughts on this one?
Our average claim payout for repair was about 10. And these are non-September 10th related events.
And when you say repair, it's
drywall repair, carpet replacement, some personal property, but mainly repair.
okay. All right, if you go to, so we're gonna do two more questions. So if you go to the next one, Adria, there's one more question on money, and I think this kind of gets.
Can I ask one question, Nick? Is the group thought that this money would cover things like a water heater, or no? I did want to understand that better.
It sounds so, Adria, if you go back to question 5. So when I think of water heater repair, I guess I heard Tanya mention property replacement. I think that's probably a better term than like furniture replacement. And I probably would include water heater and things like that.
So are we
But
going to compare ourselves to what the standard insurance policies typically cover, or?
no, it's a good question. I think the goal, so what we don't want, I think, is to create a program that looks exactly like the NFIP, because we already have that and everybody's eligible. So so either we need to be making it cheaper for people to get the NFIP, or if there's things that the NFIP doesn't cover that we want to make sure is covered, we need to be very specific and include that.
I think that's
So
what I was asking the question for. I think Tanya said it
yeah.
a little more refined, but my thing is, if there is a space, I want to make sure that we're not thinking the industry standard and then accidentally repeating what is already available when there was a clear gap between what we were expecting was going to be sufficient, what NFIP could provide, and what what people need. So I think that's, and then let's just say, sometimes the resources are not there to do that. Are we then educating folks and saying, hey, this one's more aligned with the service contract? We're going to, ask some of the service contractors, or maybe even not even service contractors, but DISB to come out and talk to you guys about service contracts, since I know that that's now in their wheelhouse, to discuss what it looks like when you don't get that kind of coverage. I think we have to understand when we're not doing something for the resident, what we either did to supplement it or what we think will fill that gap, so that we can speak knowledgeably to the customer or the resident when they're in an emergency situation.
Yeah, I think
If I could just add something, Nick.
Go
So
ahead.
I think that's a really good point. And there's one other thing that that makes this all a little bit harder, I think, and that is the fact that even though there are, even though there is the NFIP, there is homeowners insurance. You can get, you can get sewer backup coverage and stuff like that to that provides, and you can get service contracts and all that stuff. Some people just don't get that's available, and so we're trying to identify and fill in the gaps. But if the gap is all you have, then then that's not addressing your problem. But that's, I mean, we obviously, that just makes this more complicated, is what we're trying to do. I think is again is we can maybe base it on an assumption that people will get the other kind of coverage that they need, but they're not going to do that necessarily.
Yeah.
Yes, I've spoken to customers who have had to decide between purchasing insurance and eating. So we have homeowners, their homes are paid off, so they don't have the mandatory requirement to have insurance in place. So they chose not to purchase insurance, and then they rely on us to fix their problem. And fixing their problem does include, for them or to them, that does include the water heater. But if I could just put it out there, the sewer backup insurance coverage option on a homeowner's policy is so, I want to say cheap, but that's all relative. It depends on who you are and, you know, your world. So, but it is not mandatory still, I believe, that it is not part of a standard insurance policy. And I wonder if we should be talking about that as well. Like, how do we make it mandatory? Is it does it have to be something that's more legislative, or is that something Disney can mandate? Is that something we want to supplement as far as premium is concerned for the customers, or?
Do you mean mandate insurers to provide it, or you mean mandate policy or property owners to purchase?
For that to be a part of the standard policy, sewer backup coverage. So maybe maybe the customer should have to opt out, and that it automatically be part of the homeowner's policy. Like in Maryland and Virginia, it's already in the policy. In DC, you have to purchase a rider.
No, that's a great point. I'm gonna try and wrap some of these things together. So I think we'll send out the slides because we didn't get through all the questions and responses. So I would like everybody to see those. I think our goal is, I think especially if you look at like question 5, and so if we're saying these are the important things that we need to cover, maybe the next step is, are they already covered by a program? And if so, how? And then that can maybe also guide what the district government needs to do, if anything. So that could be one step, but I think, so we'll send out the slides and then, do our best at preparing some minutes that I think start to draw some conclusions from what we've heard. But after we send out the slides, if you all want to, send us some feedback and comments on what you've seen in the survey, that would be great too.
Quick question. I may have missed this. Exactly what does the number 1.69 average mean?
Yeah, so that means of all the people that took the survey, they chose on average, how to explain that? So because everyone can rank the options. And so the average rank over 16 people was 1.69.
Okay. And the 16 people who took the survey were who?
I don't know, other than they were members of the residential resilience action team.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Hey, Nick, this is Sharon Shep. Just wanted to address 2 points before we end. One, with regard to Tanya's suggestion, there is a sewer endorsement in the DC policies. So the department does require the homeowners insurance companies to provide the option to purchase the sewer endorsement, and it is up to the homeowner to make that choice. So we do require them to let homeowners know that that option is available to them, and then it's up to the homeowner to make that choice. And then with respect to the survey question in number 8, where you mentioned furniture replacement. I think there should be a distinction between furniture and mechanical systems that are necessary to run a home or a property, as opposed to furniture. So it may be worthwhile adding another item for mechanical systems, but not lump it in with furniture replacement.
Yeah, great points. We'll make sure to include that in our notes.
Yeah, I mean, almost like, I mean, a renter's policy for contents is kind of what you're talking about, and we have a lot of that. Well, we have a lot of renters in DC. Not many of them have renters insurance, and very few people have flood contents as a renter. But it's certainly something that we can help Disby tell more people about.
Yeah.
And Nick, we had just a question in the chat that I don't think got answered a little while ago. Emily R asked if they heard correctly that insurance will deny claims if there is no backwater valve.
I don't know the answer to that question.
So a standard homeowners policy. I mean, if we're talking about homeowners policies, since I think they would cover it if you have the endorsement. And you have
even if you don't have the valve installed.
They may or may not. Well, I guess they have to offer you the policy. So So if you have the coverage, they will cover the loss. But so I think it's more whether you have the coverage.
And Bill, do you see Emily's question? The endorsement, that just means like an extra.
So the endorsement is it's something that's in addition to the standard policy that generally will have an extra premium to it. This was what Sharon was talking about earlier. District law currently requires, I think, the insurance companies to offer the coverage, but it does not require the homeowners to purchase it. So it sounds like somebody said Maryland and Virginia, in contrast, make it a part of the standard policy. So it would not be an endorsement in those jurisdictions. It'd be part of the policy.
All right. Well, let's. We got 1 minute left, and we did want to mention the homework real quick.
Okay, thanks, Nick. You took my cue, so I was gonna get us into the next slides.
So Meredith, are you on this one?
I can just jump in here.
Yeah.
Clearly, there's still a lot more discussion that we need to have on the flood insurance topic, but we also want to make sure people are starting to work on the action plans that may be assigned to your agency. DC Water has quite a few related to backwater valves. Also wanted to flag for Disby, we've got one to conduct outreach to increase the number of flood insured residents. So that's our homework, and going to next steps.
Just maybe real quickly, the ones listed on here are ones that this action team has already greenlit to say, yes, we want to do these plans. There are potentially other plans that have not been greenlit that might still be eventually done, but.
So the last version of the action framework, whatever that document is called, I saw was a draft version. So I presume there's now a final version. Can you share that again, just so I don't know if it changed from the draft version, but as we work on that, I'd hate to be doing it on the wrong version.
Sure, we can resend that.
Yeah, So our next steps. Let's see. For our next action team meeting, there are some items that we haven't explored too much. One specifically is developing local workforce to perform repairs. So we think there's some effort, discussions, brainstorming on what's needed in this area. This could include job training, partnering with local organizations, creating pre-negotiated contracts with local companies. So we need to see who can take this on, to explore this more, work with all the agency and local partners to make this happen. So that's potential for discussion at the next month's action team meeting. For next week at the task force meeting, we've already discussed, we're going to report on action team's progress and present the draft action plans. So I'll turn it back to Monty to close us out.
Great, thank you so much. This was a wonderful task force meeting. I think we could probably have spent more time. I actually was doubting that we weren't going to spend that much time in the conversation, so you guys surprised me. I think I was the only outlier on that one, but thank you for participating. So we do have some meetings coming up. As Meredith said, the next governance and coordination meeting is on May 13th, which is Friday, at 10:30. And then we'll have our residential resilient meeting in June 14th. But our next full task force is May 18th. And we'll have probably more of a full discussion there as well on presenting these action plan drafts and going through our progress towards making a final report. Next slide, please. All right, well then that's it. So we are 3 minutes over. Sorry about the time overage, but we appreciate everyone's participation. If you have any questions, please, you do know that Nick, Meredith from DOEE can be reached by email, as well as Salil, Opera, and Barbara at DC Water for any other follow-up questions or concerns. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.